Are you opening the door, Olivia?
Yeah, it's officially open, so people will start coming in now. So yeah, if we give it 20 seconds or so, and then we can start.
Wait till it gets to about 70, I think. Yeah, there you go. I think you can start, James.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's James Daly. I'm the Member of Parliament for Bury North. I'm the co-chair of the APPG for Northern Culture with my colleague Julie Elliott. Julie is the MP for Sunderland Central. And we'd like to give you a really very warm welcome to everyone who's taken the time to join us this afternoon. We're pleased that so many parliamentarians and industry and academic experts have been able to join us for the launch of the Northern Culture APPG inquiry into what does Northern Culture need to rebuild, rebalance and recover. We are delighted to launch this first of its kind inquiry into Northern Culture. The North culture industry is facing a historic challenge as the global pandemic continues to affect our everyday lives. Prior to COVID-19, the Northwest cultural sector achieved the strongest growth in the UK, and the Northeast had the third highest growth in its creative sector. The North has a proud and celebrated cultural offering, and I think we all know about that, and we all celebrate that, alongside the significant social health and well-being benefits it provides. Northern Culture has a critical role to play in achieving the economic growth and upskilling ambitions across the North. Today we will hear the voices of those from across the North who are on the front line and can tell us what they think about the Northern cultural sector need to rebuild, rebalance and recover. We are delighted that so many have registered their interest in our inquiry, and would particularly like to thank our sponsors, our sponsoring partners, the Old Courts, Counterculture, CT Consultants and our academic partner, Northumbria University, for their support. As you can see from the slide that's up there in front of you, this is how to get involved. We're calling for all cultural stakeholders across the North to get involved in this first of its kind inquiry. Based on the evidence we hear, we will submit a State of the North and COVID-19 recovery report, plan to government with our recommendations. There is an online portal to allow you to submit evidence and address the key questions. The inquiry link is in the chat, and there's a deadline of the 10th of May for written evidence. Each evidence submission will be considered and referenced in our findings report, and we may call you to give oral evidence at future inquiry sessions. We want to get as many people involved in this as possible. We're passionate about this. We believe that culture across the North can drive the social, economic recovery after the pandemic. And although the sector's been through a terrible, terrible time, we want to do everything possible to give you a voice in Parliament and make sure the sector has the funding it needs to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to come as we reopen. Today's lineup is there in front of you. I'm not going to repeat all of those names, but we are looking forward to hearing from everyone. Housekeeping, the session is being recorded. Please use the hashtag on social media, the Northern Culture Inquiry. You can see the rest of it. It's important, I think, as we all know, having done many of these meetings now, please stay on mute and use the chat function while panelists speak. And we want to hear from you, your questions. Please interact with the panelists. Really, really important. And I think it's, sorry, I'm looking at the agenda there. I'll hand over to my brilliant colleague, Julie. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, James. Welcome everybody from me. It's great to see so many people here. It's been a hugely popular event this afternoon, so it's fantastic. Lots of people from all over the North, the wider North. And it's my great pleasure to introduce, first of all, Professor Katie Shaw from Northumbria University, who is going to talk about the state of Northern culture and give us the context to the inquiry we are about to launch. Katie.
Thank you so much, and thanks, James, too. Hi everybody, it's so lovely to virtually see you all today. And obviously it's a shame that we can't be launching this in one of our amazing cultural hubs across the north, but we hope by the end of this inquiry we might be able to do something face to face and in person, because we all know that the last year has been one of momentous change and challenge for the cultural sector. And it's also been one of massive change and challenge for education. And I'm here today representing Northumbria University, who are really, really delighted to be the academic sponsor for this new all-party parliamentary group for Northern Culture. And I'm really delighted as a proud Northerner to be co-authoring the inquiry report that results from this. Now, Northumbria University has a really long and proud history of working with cultural partners. Many of our cultural partnerships are more than a decade old across the north and the wider region. And these partnerships are really a stylistic trait of how we do teaching, research and impact activity at Northumbria. And as Director of Cultural Partnerships here, I've seen with my own eyes the difference working hand in hand between academia and the cultural sector can make to leveraging our power and our influence and to creating new knowledge and new opportunities for people within the region and beyond. Because when we think about the North, we automatically think about our cultural symbols and our products, whether it's the Angel of the North on the skyline, or the sculpture of Henry Moore, the music of Manchester, the wonderful street art of Sheffield, the TV and film that comes from Yorkshire, produced in the spaces and places of Yorkshire, or the amazing community arts and culture projects that pop up in cities and city regions all over the North. Because the North has always been a powerhouse for culture. But in recent years, as we know, the cultural sector and the North of England have been really doubly disadvantaged by legacies of deindustrialisation, of austerity, and most recently by a global pandemic that has hit the North and also the arts and the culture sectors the very hardest. And to go forward today, we really need to get up off our knees together. And that's why this new APPG is going to focus on leveraging the culture of the North as a social, economic and political asset to try and set out a new agenda, not just one for levelling up, but one for actually setting out a whole new vision of how we go about creating a very different post-COVID future for our sectors. In this vision, investment in the North and the cultural sector has to be at the heart of plans to supercharge the UK as a site of creative production for the 21st century. And as a proud Northerner, I have written about and advocated for the culture of the North for more than a decade in my books and in my journalism. But I'm tired of hearing about the so-called value of the Northern powerhouse only in terms of trains and technology, business and brokerage. This inquiry for the first time is going to value the capacity of culture to build innovative foundations for a new vision of the North. So this inquiry then is an opportunity, a really vital opportunity at this time, to think about how we work together, to build creative skill sets through education, to build infrastructure through capital build and digital connectivity, and to think about how we facilitate a culture of participation and inclusion across the many and varied geographies of our North. And that means listening to a really diverse range of voices, because the strength and the beauty of the North lies in its diversity. And we need to hear from all of you. We need to hear from the comics and the ballerinas. We need to hear from the artists and the writers, the performers and the producers, the directors and the audiences. This inquiry wants to hear from the broad range of cultural sectors across the North today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your evidence, to reading your submissions, and to witnessing the inquiry sessions over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. And I think the one thing I would say on what you've said there, you've set the context wonderfully, is about the partnership working we have across the North. I think that is one of the things that probably some of the difficult situations we've all found ourselves in over the years has made us be very resilient, and we all talk to each other. And I think that is one of the unique things the North has as opposed to the rest of the country. So thank you very much for that. We're now going to move on to hear the voices of Northern culture, who are going to give their perspectives on what does Northern Culture need to rebuild, rebalance and recover? That's the question. And I'm going to introduce first my friend and colleague, Alison McGovern, who is one of the shadow ministers in DCMS. Alison.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks, James. And it's an honour to follow Katie. Actually, Professor Shaw's work has had a real impact on all of Northern Culture, and so it's really, really good to have this APPG and to follow you in speaking. I just want to comment very briefly. I feel like I could speak for about 4 hours uninterrupted on Northern Culture, as I'm sure many people could. And I think that is possibly because of the first point that I want to make, in that speaking about Northern Culture can be infuriating. And it can be infuriating, particularly if you are born in the north of England, you grew up in the north of England, you live in the north of England, and as I do, you represent a constituency in the north of England. And the country is full of people who will tell us more about our culture than we are allowed to know. And if I had £1 for every time I'd heard somebody, and this is a cross-party point, if I had heard somebody pontificating on Northern culture, or as I call it, Northern stereotypes, and drawing political or other conclusions from that, I could fund the entire culture sector of the North myself. Often people want to put us in a box, but actually the truth about culture in the north of England is that it's diverse, it's global in outlook. There are a huge number of institutions, not least the universities that we have, that have partnerships around the world, and they draw from that knowledge and that insight to mean that whether it's the visual arts that we have in our cities' institutions, or whether it's the practitioners who come from all around the world to share their skills with us, we are very diverse. And I think that is really important for the second point that I want to make, which is that, as James mentioned before, culture is a fast-growing sector. It was the fastest growing part of the economy before the pandemic, particularly audio, visual, film, and other parts of the economy. And at the moment, our country has a problem, which is that we are going to need to find a way to grow our way out of the challenge that we have at the moment in terms of our public finances. Also the economy just needs to improve and grow and find innovative ways to use the same resources to help people have a better quality of life. That's basics of economic development. So I think that in order to achieve that for our country, we need to look at those areas that are fast growing, and culture is there in flashing lights. We're brilliant at it, whether it's music or film or art or other things. Secondly, in the north, we have what I think of as some of our country's emerging economies, because of the factors that Katie mentioned, deindustrialization, austerity. We have areas of our country that have historically, though not recently, but historically not seen the kind of growth that we've had elsewhere. We've described this as a problem. Actually, it's a massive opportunity. The fact that in the Northeast and the Northwest, we have the space, we have the people, we have the ambition to grow. That should be a brilliant opportunity for everyone in our country, whether you're from the North or the South or the East or the West. So put those two things together, fast growing part of our economy, the emerging economies of the North, culture in the North, and you find an important strategic answer to some of the biggest challenges our countries have. And that's before you get to talk about productivity and innovation, which culture just oozes from its every pore. Final point, and somebody's mentioned in the chat about Cumbria and understanding that the North is not just Manchester and Leeds and, you know, insert other big cities here, and that's absolutely right. We need to be full and diverse in our understanding of the North. And this is my final point, that I think the BBC announcement today is really interesting because it is an example of, I think, an ambition that everybody has, which is to tell the full story of our country. When we get frustrated about those stereotypes and told that we're this or that we're that, or that we wear flat hats, and that's the last one of those stereotypes I'm going to repeat, it's because we know that there's a bigger story to tell. And if we're able to tell that bigger story, which at the end of the day, that's what culture's for, telling a story of our identity, then we can bring our country together. And as a politician, I know that I can't do my job in wanting to show a way forward for our country without culture, because that's the bit where we can tell that story. So this is a hugely important inquiry. I'm going to shut up now, otherwise I'll talk forever. But I will be watching and grateful that this work is happening.
Thanks ever so much, Alison. That's an excellent start. We're now going over to Peter Massey, who is the Director of Northern Economy and Partnerships at the Arts Council. Peter.
Thanks, Julie. And I suppose in the same vein as Alison said it was an honour to follow Katie, I'll say it's an honour to follow Alison. As a fellow Liverpool supporter, Alison, I'm a big fan of your work on the Anfield Wrap over the years. So shout out to you and to them. I don't know whether you've been on recently or not. Anyway, back to obviously football, a massive part of Northern Culture as well. Firstly, on behalf of the Arts Council, I ought to say that we really welcome this inquiry. I think it's timely, it's important, and we will collaborate, we'll contribute in whatever way we can to it. I think more importantly, though, we will commit to listening to whatever its conclusions are. I mean, I will go on in a minute to talk about what I think we need to do, but I think picking up the point that Katie made earlier about getting up off our knees together, whatever we do, it's got to be a collaborative effort fundamentally. We believe, and I personally believe, as a Middlesbrough born, Scarborough raised and West Yorkshire living lad, that the North cannot have a successful economy without a successful cultural sector, frankly. So what does it need to rebuild and rebalance and recover? I think that firstly, we mustn't underestimate the capacity, the sector's capacity to resilience and to help themselves. I know it's been a profoundly difficult year for them, but there are loads of them have been working really hard through the whole year. You know, a lot of the sector has not closed at all. It's still been serving its audiences, it's been serving its communities, it's been doing it online, it's been doing it over the phone, it's been doing it by post. So we mustn't forget that communities have had the benefit and it has helped them through this pandemic hugely over the past 12 months. So I think that's important. There is enormous pent-up demand from the sector. We saw last year when we got to open a little bit, loads of organisations coming out with stuff ready to go, really excited, and I hope that things progress in the way that they do, so that we can see a strong and quick emergence over the summer of some amazing stuff from the organisations that are raring to go. I actually think that some of the building blocks are kind of in place. I think one of the interesting things that's happened over the pandemic is that through Zoom, through this sort of technology, I think a lot of people have been able to come together in ways that they've not done before. So we've seen things like this APPG form over that period, which I think is fantastic. We've already seen the emergence of the Northern Culture Network, which is a network of all the cultural networks across the whole of the North. We've never seen that kind of pan-Northern collaboration previously. We ourselves at the Arts Council are working more collaboratively with National Lottery Heritage Fund, Historic England, and the NP11, the group of 11 LEPs, really closely to begin to set out a kind of more of a shared vision for culture and place in the North. This is enabling, I think, all of those organisations, those mayors, those combined authorities and local enterprise partnerships, to not only recognise the value that culture has for them and for the economic recovery, but to also recognise they can play a bigger part in it, and to begin to think about how they can adapt and develop policy that enables them to swing in with us and with others to be able to support growth in the future. We've also seen some of the combined authorities and mayoral authorities begin to hire expertise in culture, which is fantastic. So there is a growing network, I think, in terms of readiness to begin to think about and implement change. In some ways, the North is in better shape than it has ever been and is really, really raring to go. And I know, you know, talking to local authority colleagues who we're in contact with regularly right across the North, you know, even though it is pretty tough for local authorities, and local authorities have had a really, really tough year, their aspiration and ambition for culture is even greater than it has ever been. They completely recognise that if their communities are going to heal and their economies are going to heal, they need to be offering people a great quality of life. So it has been tough. It's been incredibly tough, and we can't underestimate how difficult it has been for the sector. But, you know, thanks to the emergency support that we were able to put in, that the government's put in through the Cultural Recovery Fund, we do have a sector still that is there, and we'll hear from more of them in a minute who have been more at the front line, who I'm sure will tell you about the year that they've had, but also about their plans for the future and what we and everybody in this meeting can do to help. But you know, we all have a responsibility to help the sector get back on its feet, but I think more importantly, we all have a responsibility to help it fly in the long term. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pete. And yes, we're all very welcome of what the funding the government put in, but we must remember in this sector, a lot of people have fallen through the cracks as well. Right, we go to Sunderland Culture now. Keith Merrin. Keith, lovely to see you.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, and like a lot of people, I wear myriad hats, and in that I also sit on the North East Culture Partnership, which brings together all of the, you know, from Tees Valley up to the Scottish borders, and also, as Pete referenced, the Northern Cultural Network, which brings together cultural consortia from both urban and rural areas across the North, and is a really kind of interesting development. I think that there's three things I want to say, but the first one was just about being clear what we're trying to recover to. And I think that's, you know, something that the inquiry needs to think about. And it was nice to hear Katie talk about a vision for what things can be like. You know, it's not, this isn't just about the sector saying, oh, you know, we want to recover for our own sake. It's about we want to recover to something. And the reason I say that as well is just, I think the inquiry needs to recognise the long-term underinvestment in culture in the North, and in particular, where that's left us with a very fragile cultural infrastructure in many places. And if I think about Sunderland, Julie will know that we've been on this amazing trajectory of ambition over the last few years since we bid to be UK City of Culture, which has seen huge investment in the city and huge recognition of the role that culture can play. And I think certainly from a Sunderland perspective, I wouldn't want to be just recovering to where we were, but to recovering to where that trajectory of ambition will take us. So, you know, recovering or rebalancing to a much more ambitious place is something that I hope that the inquiry will look at. The second thing I wanted to say was that, you know, I think the inquiry needs to recognise the particular challenges of the North and our sector in the North, and in particular, the huge reliance on local authorities, both as funders and deliverers of cultural activity in the North. And, you know, again, in the context of many years now of local government austerity, but also, I suppose, a worry about what may happen over the next couple of years and how local authority budgets will be impacted on. And since the local authority is such a big player in culture, how that then impacts on our ability at the front line, as you've put it, to deliver. I think the second thing about the particular challenges of the sector in the North is a recognition of the impact or the reliance on the freelance workforce. Something like 50% of the cultural workforce in the North East is freelance. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it brings with it lots of different challenges that I think the inquiry should think about and address. And I would encourage you to engage with organisations like Time Aware Cultural Freelancers in thinking about that. And the final thing I just want to say about the particular challenges of the North is about our communities and the fact that our communities face particular challenges and that we then need to respond to. And I think in particular, some of the social and health inequalities that we see in our communities. And, you know, so to look at the sector in isolation of the challenges that our communities face that we then need to deal with, I think would be a big miss. And then finally, the third thing I want to say was just the opportunities that I think may exist out of all this. in particular around domestic tourism. You know, if we see a big shift towards domestic tourism, is there more that we can do as a sector to promote the North's role in that? And again, speaking from the Northeast, we have the Lindisfarne Gospels coming back to Newcastle in 2022, and also the 1900th anniversary of Hadrian's Wall. So, you know, there's just that sense, and I'm sure each of you in your own bit of the North can say similar things, but also the role that we can play at coming out of the pandemic in terms of building confidence, identity and sense of place, which are absolutely key, as we know, to our communities. And I suppose allied to that, the role that we can play in supporting the recovery of town and city centres. And again, how do we position and what are the opportunities for the sector in that? And then finally, you know, as I mentioned, the opportunities that exist for our sector to play a really significant role in tackling, for example, health inequalities. And I think there's a really strong track record now in using arts and culture and heritage to address issues around mental and physical health. And I think there's some real opportunities for us in the North, given the nature of our communities and the need to really take a lead in doing that. So those are just some ideas from me about things that we might want to pick up as part of this inquiry.
Thanks, Keith, very much. And yes, you're quite right to highlight some of the health inequalities which have come to the fore in this pandemic more than ever. We all knew they were there, but really the focus has been on them. And very challenging times, I think, as we move forward. Oh, I'm going to bring in next Hannah Mattison. Hannah's the CEO of Generator, who's been doing some fantastic work during the last year, supporting up-and-coming artists and people in the cultural sector. Hannah.
Thanks, Julie. As Julie said, I'm the CEO of Generator. We're a music talent development agency based in the Northeast, and we focus particularly on new and emerging artists in the region. And over the last 12 months, we've seen firsthand the impact that COVID has had on the careers of many artists, those who are just beginning to forge their way in an industry which in itself has many challenges to address, have been set back, left unsupported, or even deterred from realising their passions and careers in the first place. Much like UK Music's research, we found that around about a third of artists we engage with have or are considering giving up on a career in music for fear it is unsustainable, that their art won't be valued, or simply losing confidence in themselves after months of isolation. I think that we're facing a mental health crisis amongst artists, and that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. We've also seen how venues have struggled to survive, and although they're doing all they can to ensure that they can be there when the live industry opens up again. And we've seen freelancers and those working in the live music industry have to reconsider their own futures due to a lack of financial support. The pivot to delivering work digitally has excluded many, particularly in the North, where connectivity, access to internet and equipment isn't always as readily available as we kind of assume. And I think from our perspective that, you know, there's almost a bit of a fear that over the last 12 months, we've potentially lost an entire generation of artists who haven't had the opportunities that they were maybe expecting. However, amongst kind of all of that uncertainty, there comes some highlights, I suppose. We've seen how resilient, pragmatic and creative artists and music businesses have been. Ourselves, we've managed to adapt our entire talent development programme to be delivered online and digitally. So we've provided over 1,000 hours of support to around about 200 artists in the last 12 months. We've worked with artists who don't want to simply accept that their career has to have been put on hold for a year, and who have taken this time not to retrain, but to upskill. So they are diversifying their income streams, but all for the benefit for their own creative practice. We've seen the formation of a number of local and regional partnership networks across the North that have enabled artists to remain connected to their peers in times of isolation, and even forge new collaborative opportunities that may never have happened otherwise. Our ability to innovate our ways of working and adapt to the new has been quite enlightening at times. So I think that what this inquiry needs to consider going forward is the funding that is available or not, the guidance for that funding, and how clear and accessible it is to the artists who we serve. And then to look at our cultural stakeholders and our need to ensure that our programmes and opportunities are relevant, sustainable and inclusive, so that we can begin to rebuild our industries with a better knowledge of the inequalities that currently exist, and so that we can adapt and be more effective. We shouldn't lose the new ways of working and the new ways that we've been thinking over the last year either, and make sure that we continue to apply them to our future work, instigating kind of institutional change for the better going forward.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Thank you so much. We go to Henry Murison, our dear friend Henry, Director of Northern Powerhouse Partnership. It wouldn't be a call about the North, Henry, without you here.
No, and I'm really glad to be here. And it's lovely to see so many friends, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I suppose what I'm here to talk about really is the link between making the North a more prosperous and a great place to live and the cultural sector, right, and its offer. And those two things are absolutely connected to each other, right? And so you can't have an ambitious and transformed North of England without its cultural sector remaining as distinctive, but also as successful as we know it can be. And so I, like Pete, absolutely welcome the coming together of the North's cultural consortiums, and now having certainly for us as a partnership, those we can work with as partners, right, who represent these institutions. And we'll certainly do whatever we can do in any practical way to support that movement of organisations to have the voice it deserves, the same way that we have always been able to represent kind of the business and civic leaders of the North who've come together through our organisation. We absolutely see those cultural organisations and their leaders coming together with a joint purpose and a unity of purpose, which absolutely mirrors what the business community want, right? Which isn't just a more prosperous North for them to benefit, but a North of England that is able to close those huge divides we have with the rest of the country and the economic challenges that then poses to the people who live here. Because I think when people we start to talk about transformational productivity assumptions and raising GVA, perhaps doesn't get people emotionally excited. I think that we need to talk about what we're going to do to close the educational divides in our country, and those are often between here in many of our northern communities and the rest of England in particular. Well, the arts and cultural sector is doing so much in that space, and when I talk to cultural organisations like the Hepworth in Wakefield, who with their partners have had artists in residence, for instance, in local schools in West Yorkshire, ensuring that they can make their impact on dealing with those disadvantaged divides in our society. We absolutely see in practice that although our cultural sector might not be as well funded perhaps by the state as other parts of the country, we've already seen some of those comments in the chat, and we are addressing that. There are parts of the north of England, like in Leeds as a city, that actually have quite a lot of national portfolio organisations, but they use that to good effect in many cases to make a great impact in communities. But whether it be those organisations that are the smallest and are in some of our most marginalised communities and are bottom up, or whether they be organisations which rival rightly the great names and are among the great names of our national cultural sector, the collaboration between those two ends of the movement is absolutely vital, because what we need, isn't it, is an inclusive arts sector that can make this a more inclusive north of England. And there is no model for economic development that doesn't see the cultural sector playing a huge role. I'm very privileged to be a trustee of something called The Factory, that is not a project without its complexities, which is a new home for the Manchester International Festival, and is explicitly a project that was only able to be funded because of the Northern Powerhouse. And there are a number of other interventions that have been made in the cultural sector by government that have absolutely been part of that Northern Powerhouse policy. But now that this is an economic ambition and a set of social ambitions, which I suppose has in part been returned to where it started, with northern leaders and organisations driving the agenda of what the North should be about, rather than just be a political construction of government, which I was always very clear it could never just be. I think it's absolutely upon us the opportunity to ensure that as we build for a recovery in our country and a recovery in the north of England, and we look to economic rebalancing, we look at rebalancing in cultural terms, not around simply the financial investment made by central government, but the value and the opportunities that are created. Because I think it's absolutely the case that we over-index in the benefits of a cultural sector to wider society today. And what we don't want to do is, if we grow our cultural sector, simply do it in the way that other parts of the country have done, without necessarily remaining as close to communities and as relevant. So as Northern Powerhouse Partnership, a bit like Pete, I suppose we're here partly to learn the lessons from this piece of work and see what role we can play. And certainly as an organisation that convenes people who want to work together in the north of England, our doors and the way we work is absolutely open to having a closer, stronger alignment with the interests of the cultural sector, and to be able to, because in our model, right, we don't speak for people, we are a way of convening, ensuring that the voices of the cultural sector play a louder role in national policy debate, not just around the arts and culture, but in areas like education and in health, for instance, and around the wider inequalities debate, where I absolutely believe that the arts and culture sector in the north of England has a huge role in addressing the underlying challenges that exist in the north of England. And I think that's an approach certainly to what we would like to do going forward over the coming years, and how we approach the recovery that sees arts and culture not as an add-on or an afterthought. And obviously our chair, George Osborne, not an undivisive figure, of course, in many parts of British public life, has worked with us very strongly, not just to advocate for the role of the arts and culture sector in the UK going forward, and particularly around the cultural bailout, which was an issue of which we took a strong stance, even though it probably disproportionately benefited the south of England, but we thought it was essential anyway to the whole country's interests. But actually, as we look at the BBC decision today and other movements that are happening around the north, it's absolutely the case that we are on the verge of being able to bring some transformational changes to our arts and cultural sector. And I think the Northern Powerhouse debate in its various forms, right, has had a big role to play in that, in helping to get people to think differently about what the role of the north of England could be. And the fact that John Whittingdale, right, calls Manchester a place of sort of cultural elitism that's just as bad, metropolitan culture, just as bad as London, is a great sign of our success. Because if those who want to fight a culture war are prepared to turn their arms against cities like Manchester, which in many ways is not like London in quite the same way, and does have some things that make it quite special and interesting, then perhaps we are succeeding in changing people's perceptions of the north of England. Because if people like John Whittingdale are shouting us and telling us that we're somehow the new establishment, then that we must be doing something right, Julie. And on the day that local radio comes to Sunderland permanently, we celebrate in all parts of the north of England and to Bradford, where I'm sitting. So we both now have peak BBC local radio stations to listen to. So something to unite the good people of Bradford and of Sunderland today, Julie.
Thank you. Yes, it is a bit Sunderland-centric, some of this today, but I'm not going to apologise for that, Henry. But really interesting, wide-ranging view there. So we're going over to the General Director of Opera North now, Richard Mantle, a view from Opera. You're on mute, Richard.
I know. There we go. It's very, very good to be part of this meeting this afternoon, and I'm delighted on behalf of Opera North that we are here. As many of you know, Opera North is one of the largest MPOs in the whole of the north of England, and probably both in terms of turnover and in terms of the number of people we employ. And it's interesting this last year, which of course, you know, we haven't been silent. We've not been public in our theatres, and our theatres range from our base in Leeds to the northeast, to Newcastle and Gateshead, across to the west in Manchester and Liverpool, and into the east in Hull. We don't seem to go very much further south, apart from when we go down to Nottingham. I'm not even sure Nottingham's in the north. But it's, you know, in a normal year, even for Opera North, we would, in addition to our 250 employees who are core based here in the north, we would be drawing in something in the region of 900 freelance workers and artists from all over the country, and in fact beyond the UK, to work in the north and to earn and to spend and to be part of that economy. And that, of course, has just disappeared from us. And we're obviously going to hope that that comes back. And I think our role also, I think we like to celebrate, I did put it in the chat, that in partnership with the University of Leeds, we manage the Culture Forum North, which is this great collaboration between higher education and cultural sector. So I do urge you all to take an interest in that if you don't know about it already. I think what we've been learning, I mean, we're a large organization, and yeah, we're known probably more for the operatic output that we stage in many large theatres in the north of England. But I think we have, over the last 5 to 10 years, and this has been really sharpened in this last year of pandemic, the impact that arts organisations, and certainly large ones like us, can have on communities. And I think we, and I'll speak on behalf of many arts organisations, can and should be viewed as real instruments of regeneration and renewal. We need to focus arts organisations on how they understand their civic role, I think, and their societal value in building up of communities which have taken a huge knock in the last year. And as we come out of this, I think we and many others can really take this opportunity to focus on the well-being of communities, not just health and well-being, which is clearly another very important aspect of the way arts and culture can pull people to bring people together. And we have also been learning hugely about how literally music really can raise the aspiration of young people, particularly those in the education centre at the more disadvantaged end, where engagement and participation in things like music or that is almost non-existent. We've developed a model here in Leeds which could be rolled out in every town and district of the north. It would need some money, but where we now on a weekly basis are teaching 2,000 young people in 6 schools across Leeds, disadvantaged areas of Leeds, to learn to sing and to play, not to be professionals, but just to give aspiration and inspiration to their lives. And there are very demonstrable benefits that have been cited by Ofsted about the way in which the children in these schools have benefited through our In Harmony programme. And that's really led to increased academic achievements. And almost more importantly, family and parental engagement for those children and support for those children in school. This is a fantastic model, In Harmony. There's one run by the Liverpool Philharmonic also on the other side of the country. These should be in every rural and city centre, town centre location. It would transform our communities. It would transform opportunities for young people. I can't really emphasise that enough. Our as an arts organisation, we have some main tenets that we really stand by. One of them, as I've mentioned, is community. The whole question of how we encourage wider participation and engagement in a very democratic way. This is not just about turning up at theatres, whilst that will happen, and not everybody can actually do that. But we've got to address the agenda of how everybody should have a democratic right to be engaged and to participate in artistic activity at whatever level. We've learned hugely about digital transformation over this last year. Certainly we at Opera North have, and I know many others have. And there are some key drivers here for how we can expand the experience of art and culture and the inspiration of art and culture through digital media. That's not the only way by any means, and we need to, but I think it needs supporting. So I would say that I think the arts, and certainly someone like Opera North, stands absolutely ready to continue the participation that participation and collaboration we have with many organisations across the north, to in the end deliver equality of access for everybody, but also an equality of provision right throughout the north, whether that's a city centre or a rural area. And I think as someone mentioning on the chat about the rural areas are very much deprived, and I think we as arts organisations can really benefit. We can take real benefit into all those communities. I think I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Richard, and really interesting listening to some of the work that you're doing with schools, because not only do we need a pipeline of talent coming through, but I think the added benefits that culture in schools has is just, almost immeasurable. It's so important. We now move on to Dave Jenkins from the Old Courts, one of our sponsoring organisations. Dave.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's lovely to be here today, actually, in the sense of in this meeting, but also as an organisation, because we are one of the lucky organisations that's been able to get the support needed to survive over the past 12 months yesterday since we actually they closed the doors. So those of you who don't know, the Old Courts is a 7-year-old multi-arts centre based in Wigan. We're also the new custodians of the Square Chapel Arts Centre in Halifax, and the lead organisation on the collaborative touring network, which tours to 7 towns and cities across the UK of low engagement of the arts, which is a 6-year-old network. I'm bringing today a very much a kind of a town-focused head in terms of the challenges that are facing the towns and the town centres across the north, and the lack of sustained growth, the lack of sustained investment, and the historical low investment, and how that differs within the kind of the towns of the north. One of the biggest challenges that we face is the retention of talent in the towns. We need to create not just places for people to engage with arts, but ecosystems within the towns that support development and collaboration. Collaboration is key, but is quite difficult within some towns with the historic low investment, because when opportunities are available for investment, they tend to be competitive, not in a good way that provokes kind of a better level of art form production, but competitive in a negative way, because whoever loses out could be a detriment for their organisation. And we need to kind of move to the next stage where we can be in a position to kind of co-develop and co-create with other collaborators across sector within the boroughs, but that to be complementary and that to be supported. And for that, we need a resilient and a sustained growth model within the sector. Wigan itself has been over a roller coaster of investment and opportunity. There's amazing, great cultural stuff come out of Wigan over the years, but it's never been constant. It's had peaks and troughs. Things open, things close. A lot of projects are linked to project funding, which builds up opportunity, especially with children and young people. It rises to ambitions. It gets through to parents who then start supporting young people to look at artistic careers, which is something we find quite challenging in the towns. And then quite often it ends and then it has to be built up again, which takes everyone on a journey that is counterproductive. So one of the things I want to see moving forward is that kind of sustainment of investment and the ability for the sector to play a role in looking past 12 months and how the sector can plan for 3-5 years with the knowledge that that investment and the support will be there to support longer term plans.
Thank you, Dave. And I think you've highlighted a crucial point there. Long-term funding so that plans and activities can happen, I think, is crucial to so much of the work in this area. Often, you know, you kind of taking money from here to subsidise that. And I think there does need to be a bit more of an overarching plan of more sustained funding. So thank you for your contribution. I'm going to go over now to the Executive Director of Blackfest, Jabida Khartoum. Jabida.
Hi, Julie. Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting me today to this very important discussion. I resonate with a lot of people that are in the room that have already raised a lot of issues here, especially with academia and arts. It's something that we're looking at as well ourselves within our research. One of the things that I did want to kind of center is diversity and especially racial equality, and ensuring that there is that representation within the arts sector that is representative of voices that are not heard. As an organization, you know, I resonate with a lot of the people that are talking about freelancers and mental health, and I do feel that there needs to be a lot of support towards our freelancers that have really worked really hard, and they have been so resilient throughout the pandemic. Obviously, we know that COVID-19 has affected brown and ethnic minority communities, Black and ethnic minority communities the most, and having that support towards them and the right support to be able to kind of help them and support their cultural recovery as well back into society. And there may be more anxieties there that need to be kind of addressed as well. Obviously, Blackfest is in Liverpool, a very socialist city with a lot of obviously health inequalities, and we're one of the highest, number of areas with deprivations. So health is another thing. I mean, arts and culture play such an important role in like supporting mental health, health and well-being, furthering education, training, employment. And I think we're all interconnected in terms of economic growth, and arts does play a massive role in that, in enabling to do that. Yes, I do feel that grassroots organisations, in particular ours is a very grassroots organisations, we're not MPO, we are falling through the cracks. It'd be really lovely to see those things on the agenda, to see more grassroots organisations getting the ample amount of support that are really have had more of a struggle in terms of survival in COVID-19 and continuing to provide work to our freelancers. Ourselves, we've worked with musicians, poets, we're a combined arts organisation, so we've worked across the board. Our arts institutions are amazing. They've been very, very supportive, and they do want to see real radical change within the arts sector and the cultural recovery, and supporting communities to be able to make arts as accessible as possible, and a feeling of belonging and a sense of belonging, whether it's museums, theatres, any kind of venue. It's supporting, like I said, like some of the things that have been raised, working with National Heritage Lottery, and really putting those stories on the platform, and yeah, more partnership working. And I'd love to see more leadership from Black and Brown voices as well in rooms, and would love to be, you know, invite more people as well in terms of representation. And I'd love to hear and see more representation, even myself being the only kind of person here of colour. We could see more when we look at the hierarchy and that structural barrier, all of those things. We need to look at structural barriers within institutions and funding, and you know, how do we enable artists to access those kind of funding streams, grassroots organisations. For me also as well, you know, it's an exciting time knowing that culture and arts has such an important role to play in the cultural recovery, and therefore we should be prioritised by the government, by constituents across the board. And yeah, keep on connecting communities and breaking racial barriers, and making sure that we are being heard is definitely one. And yeah, arts and management and pathways for freelancers to understand how to become sustainable. That's been one of our main priorities that we're looking at in terms of how we are doing artist development, and readdressing the balance. Thank you. Someone's saying readdressing the balance. But yeah, breaking those glass ceilings has been very, very difficult as well for us as an arts organisation. So yeah, it'd be really great to kind of even connect with everybody in this room and see how else we can, you know, consult, learn and grow together, and make sure that those imbalances are corrected. You know, we've seen lots of interviews recently with Meghan Markle. The UK does have a racism issue, and it is very hidden. And I think that's mainly what we need to also look at. We need to see those elements, and we need to see how we can bring in different voices from the communities. And again, I think class plays a big role in this, and making sure that the working class community is heard, as well as the Black and Brown communities, their voices are heard. So those are added pressures as us for an organisation to also look at those, readdressing those issues. So yeah, please do follow us as well at Blackfest, please. We are a festival, but we're a new model of a festival. So we do work throughout the year. And we, you know, it's on a need-to-need basis. We do youth work. We kind of support not just freelancers, but our communities to access arts in a way that, you know, that's accessible, and making sure that everybody is enjoying the arts and culture, and their stories are also there. Do want to see a lot of more diversity. That includes when we look at intersectionality as well, and we look at gender and all these other sections. It's making sure the Black intersections and Brown intersections are also being heard, and even people from really different religious backgrounds. Everybody gets a say in the arts, and the arts has to be a bit more inclusive, and cultural sectors and communities are very diverse. So yeah, we're all about putting that in the map, but again, it's about the interconnectedness and how much support we have to do that. And we are open to those conversations as well. And keep on creating the dialogue, guys. I think dialogue is really important. And I think thank you so much for inviting me, and having that dialogue and keeping those dialogues open is important.
Thank you, Javida. And you have certainly, you may be only one person on this panel from a more diverse background, but you've certainly put the issues on the agenda there very, very well. And I think we need to ensure that we encourage organisations from the sector to come forward and give evidence in this inquiry as we move forward. So thank you ever so much for your contribution today. We're going to move now to another one of our sponsoring organisations, Tom Wilcox, who is one of the partners at Counterculture. Tom.
Thank you, Julie. Counterculture, the UK's leading arts consultancy based in Manchester, is proud to support Northern Culture APPG and welcomes this inquiry. It's essential for the economic health and well-being and social recovery of the North that culture is at the centre of it, as the other speakers have all spoken to. Much like the sense of artistic renewal that followed the last global pandemic in 1918 to 20, from the disruption and chaos, there is an opportunity to rip it up and start again, as the popular early 80s beat combo Orange Juice reflected on. Or, in fact, perhaps to abandon yesterday, as the strategist Peter Drucker would have us do. But the chance to take the best practice from the pre-COVID cultural sector and combine it with innovation and dynamism to address the future must be taken. The modernist themes from the 1920s of experimentation in the way we make, present and administer culture, and symbolism around how we build a sense of place in the North and its communities are resonant now. Another echo of a century ago is the extent to which the pandemic has served as an accelerant of social change, technological development and consumer behaviour. We'll have to be extremely attentive to understand what that really means in practice when the doors of all of our great venues open again, and all our other arts practice that's been missing over this time. And we need to be agile enough as funders, government, local government, arts practitioners and arts administrators to respond decisively to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much for your contribution there. And finally, in this section, we're going to go to Alex Saint. Alex is the Chief Executive Officer of another one of our supporting organisations, CT Consults. Alex.
Thank you. So yes, at CT Consults, we're all about culture and place. We work all over, but we are based and absolutely and utterly rooted in the north of England. Many of you may know us for running our regional website, creativetourist.com, which we've been busy with during the pandemic and are ready to relaunch it more as a regional platform, actually, to be able to support many of you as you start to emerge from lockdown in the coming months. And thanks to the Arts Council for helping us with that. Most of our work is around overcoming fragmentation, helping places to use culture, to innovate, to communicate their identity and their values, and to influence perception change, activate experiences, animate space, and drive enterprise. Coming last, I'm going to try not to replicate what's gone before, although all of it was valid, and I hugely support it. So I'll try and add something a little bit different, and in thinking about culture and what the North needs in order to rebuild, rebalance, and recover, and just chip in perhaps a couple of thoughts. The first of which being thinking about how we need as a sector and need support in the sector in stepping across some of our sector boundaries. I'm thinking here in particular about how we can make sure and position ourselves to be viewed and valued as more instrumental in supporting new government funded initiatives like the Future High Street funds, those town centre funds and heritage action zones. Too often as a sector we are sidelined or overlooked in terms of being delivery partners. The money goes elsewhere, and actually we've got a really big role to play, and we need help in being brought and given a seat at those tables. And the next step on from that perhaps is referencing that recent report that came out from AEA consulting around how too little connection is made in places between the creative industries on one hand and the cultural sector on another. Culture seen as being image, creative industries seen as enterprise and jobs, and we've got to get beyond that narrative and learn to work better together as partners across that divide. If we can't do it ourselves, then you know that within the cultural and creative industries, we really need to make progress there and position ourselves. But particularly, I want to think about today around and bring in the perspective of the 15 million people who live here in the Northern region, that huge internal market. Currently, with all of that pent-up demand, that well-being need, and the need and the urgency to get out and about, meet up with friends again, and be confident that they can do that in safe spaces, which the cultural sector can provide in abundance. Well-managed spaces, and our future attenders, champions and hosts for what other speakers have referred to as that sort of cultural tourism market. But we are our own internal market too. And Northern Culture can deliver to that in spades. But we need to do it through partnership working and join together in a proposition of real scale and huge substance. That speaks already, many speakers have touched on that already. But that proposition of scale needs to level up the cultural experience across the region and celebrate the whole of our Northern identity and diversity, whether that's in attending mainstream cultural institutions or enjoying our heritage landscape. All of those things matter, and all of those things need to be brought together. And we need to encourage dispersal, particularly so in a post-pandemic world when we're looking to manage our way out of lockdown in a safe and controlled way. So dispersal is really important, which is why it's really important that we are diverse and we cover everything and not just talk about the Northern culture in terms of those same old icons that we roll out all of the time, and that we have that sense of diverse message, and that every resident can find what they're looking for. And that's where we start to trip up over ourselves a little bit, and it's certainly not what we have. We're not easy to find as a sector, and not everybody knows, and awareness can be quite low. So a couple of speakers have talked about digital transformation. It's absolutely fundamental to us, our future resilience and sustainability and awareness as a sector and as a region. As CT Consults, we've undertaken many surveys and audits, and we really know that there is need within the sector for a serious programme of investment in digital skills for digital transformation. And I'm thinking here not so much around digitally accessed content, which of course is really important, but more fundamental and more basic around that in terms of digital skills, in terms of marketing. In the way in which other sectors have been supported through the growth companies across the region. Cultural industries and cultural sector needs that support as well. There needs to be investment in digital infrastructure, from shifting our websites from being online brochures to being the hard-working engines of digital strategies. We can't do that with the budgets that are available. There's a need for new channels and platforms, for digital marketing networks and joint working, and for spend. So few of our cultural organisations know how to take advantage of the $10,000 a month, for example, that's available of free marketing support from Google. And they don't know how, because they haven't got the skills, they haven't got the confidence or the resource to manage it if they do access that funding. and with limited tracking and monitoring and measuring in place, we can't measure that return on investment. So this is something that the sector really needs to get hold of, but there's a need for investment in that, and that would be my call to this group to present to Parliament to say this needs considering alongside these wider and big issues for the cultural sector. Please don't forget these as well, where we can be impactful. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. And the passion that came through there is very evident. And I think that's one of the things we've heard from a range of people on the panel today, and their passion for their particular part of the cultural agenda has come through loud and clear. And it's my job to say thank you to you all for contributing. We're going to move on to the next section now, and I'm going to hand back to my co-chair of this all-party group, James. I think James is back on the call, James Daly.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. Thank you to all of our speakers. Because time is getting short, because we have some wonderful contributions, I'm going to bring in our Vice Chair of the APPG, Alex Sobel MP, just to hear what Alex thinks about the contributions and his views on how we should take the inquiry going forward. Alex, are you there?
I'm here, yeah. That was incredibly rich set of contributions. I didn't hear some of the first few, but I heard, I think, the last 7 or 8 from Richard onwards. I think that this inquiry is going to be really important for us because the North is such a rich and diverse place, and actually culture is so rich and so broad. You know, I'm the Shadow Minister for Tourism and Heritage, and I believe that most of my portfolio really is about culture, not just the heritage bit. And I think that I was going to make a few points, and I'll maybe reflect on what people said. So the inquiry itself is going to look at, first of all, what's happened during COVID and the recovery. And one of the big things that's happened is the Cultural Recovery Fund. I just want to give a little anecdote from my own constituency. MPs love to talk about their own constituencies, don't they? But 2 of the oldest cinemas in the UK are in my constituency. The Cottage Road Cinema, built in 1911, the Hyde Park Picture House, built in 1914. Cottage Road is privately owned, and the Hyde Park Picture House is publicly owned. Hyde Picture House, and I'm very grateful for it, received a CRF grant, but Cottage Road didn't. So there is a little bit of feast and famine going on, that although it's not really that much of a feast because they would have been operated commercially if there hadn't been COVID, but some organisations have been supported through CRF and others haven't, and the ones that haven't are really struggling, and the ones that have are more or less okay. I think that's the best way to put it. And I think that's one thing that we need to look at. Who got it, who didn't get it, what do we need to do to help those, particularly the ones that didn't. Then going forward, sort of post-COVID, if we're going to get fully to post-COVID, but certainly when people are back enjoying culture again, we've got a sort of situation where we really need to have a broad as culture offer as possible and involve everybody and remove the barriers to it. Jabida was great, absolutely right. We need to remove barriers, you know, for working class people, for black people and brown people, for women, for disabled people, for a whole load of people, not just in terms of being able to access to go to it, but to be able to involve in it, to be able to be employed in it, to be able to be in the amateur field as well. And I think that's really important. I'll just give like one example, is like say about theatre. My son goes to Leeds Youth Theatre, which is great, although it's been shut for a whole year, which is really difficult. And it's very good value. I won't say cheap, it's very good value, and anybody can access it. And it's produced some great, Angela Griffin is a production of there, Peter O'Toole, who was, when he was young, they were a minority community, the Irish. So it's produced all these great people, and you know, if you compare it to some of the really expensive places, if we're honest, in the private sector in terms of youth theatre, it's great and accessible, but it's really limited. It took my son 2 years to get a place. We need to scale that up, so that every young person from every community, whatever it is, whatever cultural activity it is, they can access it and so they can go on. And that's part of removing the barriers. I'm also really keen, so I'm also working, there's a collapse on my shelf, so I'm being slightly distracted by it, so apologise about that. I'm working on the mayoral campaign for Tracy Brabham. Sorry to bring a little bit of party politics in it, who's my colleague, who's a former Shadow Culture Minister. And one of her big visions, which I absolutely share, is that we need a film studio for the North. You know, not just so people, you know, don't have to go to Hollywood, you know, to pursue the career, but even in this country where the film studios, Pinewood, Shepperton, Dagenham's just got that investment. Where's our film studio? We just need to look at how many TV and film productions are made here. The BBC today committed to a new TV series in the North, and actually, to fair play to them, to establish a new radio stations in places like Bradford and Sunderland. Channel 4's obviously moved to Leeds. I'm a little bit Yorkshire centric. I have to apologise for that. But and so we're seeing that there is some retrenchment, but we need to create a pipeline so anybody can access it. It's not just people with university degrees who are incoming. It's our own people from the grassroots up, getting all of that support from school right through into those jobs, not just at the front, but also, you know, in the back and in the supply chain. And I think that's really important. And I'm just going to finish on one final point, that culture is a really broad thing. So one of the things that I'm doing Parliament is I'm chair of the Video Games All Party Group. I strongly believe video games are an important part of our cultural offer. We have a video games museum in Sheffield, the only one in the country, the National Video Games Museum. And video games are an intrinsic part, actually, of our northern culture and economy. Some of the greatest video games in the world have been made here. So we need to have a very broad look at how we do this and what we do this and how this is going to work, and not just focus on things that people traditionally have thought about as culture.
Thank you, Alex. That was brilliant. We've got about 20 minutes left, and we've got a lot to cram in. We're going to have an open discussion Q&A, and I'm going to bring people's comments in, and hopefully you'll want to come and speak directly to the panel as well. But first of all, can you say in reply to Anne Wagner-Knott, Anne asks, is the inquiry just for organisations to submit evidence, or can freelancers, independents participate too? Everybody, absolutely everybody will want to participate. So the answer to that is a big yes. However, before we just get into the open Q&A, we've got another fantastic speaker. Jamie Nkoju Goodwin, CEO of UK Music, has kindly joined us. Jamie, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi, Jamie. Can you share your thoughts on the inquiry and Northern Culture, and where do you think we should go with this?
Well, thank you very much for having me here to speak. Apologies for me only just being able to join. And look, I think firstly, when it comes to Northern Culture, I should say I speak very much as someone who's born in London and spent most of my life in London, and probably spend most of the rest of my life in London. Northern Culture is should be absolutely vital to anyone who cares about the future of this country, because when it comes to Northern Culture, it's not just a valuable and vibrant part of culture in its own right, but actually it's fundamentally important to the cultural offering of the UK as a whole. I looked at UK Music, whereby when you look at a lot of our musical history, musical expertise, and musical heritage, so much of what many sectors offer and what many sectors do can be so driven by London and the South East. Actually, one of the real benefits of our creative industries and cultural industries is the benefit and the strength it has across the UK as a whole. And when we're looking to be recovering from this pandemic, looking to be succeeding as a country post-Brexit, one of the things we're going to need are industries that are growth industries. It's industries that have the jobs of the future, and industries that can spread their economic potential across the country as a whole. I don't think anyone wants the recovery we see from this pandemic to be focused in one area of the country. We want to be supporting sectors and industries that can be spread an economic benefit across the country as a whole. The music industry as an industry is pre-pandemic was demonstrating double-digit growth. It's a sort of industry should have been one of the key successes of the 2020s. In terms of jobs, many of the jobs in the music industry in the past year have been essentially at threat and at risk. And one of the true tragedies has been that the jobs of the future are going to be creative and cultural. The irony is that the jobs that have been seen as non-viable over the course of the pandemic are actually the jobs that are going to be most resistant to automation. If there's one thing we've learned in the past year, it's that you can't automate creativity. There's no real substitute for live performance, for music. And while in many sectors we've managed to supplant ways of working through Zoom, do things very differently, actually there's been no real substitute for live music and our cultural industries. And post-pandemic, looking at those sort of industries, like the music industry, like as Alex just said, the games industry, the whole wider creative and cultural industry, it's where there's growth opportunities, it's where there's jobs of the future, and it's where you are spreading economic benefit across the whole country. Just as an example, in 2019, take the Northwest for example, 1.5 million people went to the Northwest for live music events, spending £500 million and supporting thousands of jobs. Now, as we're looking to bounce back from this pandemic, it's exactly these sort of sectors that be driving demand, driving consumption, and actually being able to rejuvenate our local communities and regions, which are going to be so important. And as an industry, I think as an industry, we see ourselves playing a really key role in this across the country as a whole. There's a lot of things we need in terms of making sure we're recognising the importance of the talent pipeline. We're prioritising education. It's making sure that musicians can still be performing, particularly internationally. The soft power benefits from the music industry in particular are huge, and ensuring that particularly touring in Europe and more widely, more globally, aren't impeded in the years to come. But also actually just recognising the vital importance that culture, and particularly culture, plays not just at a national level, but also at a regional and a local level as well. And the role it can play not just economically, but actually as part of our cultural identity. If you look at the music industry, we're not just an industry, it's just been focused on one bit of the country. As an industry, we've got so much potential in the years ahead, and I think making sure that we can help drive the post-pandemic recovery, help deliver the positive benefits that we've always delivered, I think are fundamentally important, and we're really keen to be doing everything we can to be supporting that.
Thank you, Jamie. That's, I think, a really inspiring message for people all across the North. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm going to bring in now Charlotte Morris. I'm sorry to do this to you, Charlotte. You made a fantastic comment in the chat. Would you mind speaking to the panel directly and to everyone who's joined us today?
Unmute.
Are you there, Charlotte?
Yep.
Hello.
Hi, Charlotte.
Can you hear
Hi.
me? Hello, sorry. God, I'm glad I just finished my lunch, you know, caught me unawares there. I wasn't expecting that. Right, yeah, thank you very much, James, and thanks for everyone's contributions. Really interesting discussion. I should explain, sorry, I'm from the University of Salford. That's my interest. We obviously have a huge stake in the future talent pipeline, the workforce, the skills and education agenda. My question was actually on, it sounds like a higher education question, but I think it's really important. The government is sort of indicating its future direction of funding for higher education, and the suggestion that degrees in the sort of arts and cultural sector are, and I'm doing air quotes here, low value, and there's potential that funding would be sort of diverted away from those courses to more strategic courses in, you know, kind of STEM subjects. At the University of Salford, we obviously think this would be quite damaging, and I just wanted to sort of get the panelists' views on that, really. One perspective I had was, at the university, we support a graduate scholarship in the arts. So we provide funding and mentoring and studio space for recent graduates to go on and try and set up as artists. There's been a lot of talk about freelancers. Obviously, if you're going to go set up like that and become a freelancer, you're probably not going to have a huge salary when you graduate. And this government tends to judge the value of a degree on your salary 18 months now after education. So we just welcome, I guess, contributions on how we continue to encourage people to take up degrees in the arts, get them into that pipeline, whether it's freelancers, when it's going into creative industries and sector, and just, yeah, welcome your views on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Katie Shaw, can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And it's probably going to be no surprise what I'm going to say. The very concept of value beginning and ending with pounds and pence is bonkers. For a start, and completely rides roughshod over all the stuff we've said today about the social benefit and the health and well-being benefit of the arts and culture, but also it's a fundamentally disconnected assertion. We've seen recently complete overhauls of curricula in terms of GCSE and A-level, whether that's in my own subject of English literature or the other creative sectors. And actually it's fundamentally short-sighted, because not only do our subjects effectively offer financial contribution to other STEM subjects when it comes to tuition fees, but they're also really key to creating a balanced society. And it overlooks the economic contribution that the arts and culture make and our graduates make to the local and the national economy, which is really profound. On another level, it just speaks of a real lack of education about the way in which our graduates are also experts. You know, we live in an era of being told that we have no space for experts anymore, and that's changed over the last 12 months, and suddenly experts are in vogue again. But also we live in an era of things like fake news, and our graduates have that unique capacity to be able to help us make sense of the world and tell stories about the contemporary and tap into our communities. And more importantly, our graduates are global graduates. Our graduates go on and create culture and change the world over. You know, culture is the UK's 5th biggest economic export. So we need to be really careful in thinking about what we consider to be low or high value in the same way as we do low or high art, because there is no such thing. These things are intersectional. And by pushing out negative spins on these degree subjects, all we're doing is stymieing again the kind of people who will go into these industries. And I do think, as several of our speakers have highlighted today, and people in the chat too, there was a huge piece of work to do here with schools and with education and FE and HE and careers advisors too, and teachers, to educate them about the multiplicity of jobs in the creative sectors and the leadership opportunity and potential of all of our graduates too.
Thank you, Katie. Due to time, I'm not going to go to the panel at this moment. I just want to hear from somebody else. Michael Taylor from Manchester Met. Are you there, Michael?
Here he is.
Michael here. Let me...
Just needs to unmute.
Michael, can you unmute?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Sorry, Michael. Do you want to make your point, Michael?
Yeah, there's one thing. I think Liverpool has great ambitions to be a centre of the film industry. I just wanted to react to that point that was made by Alex Sobel. I'm sure that one of the Liverpool members of Parliament or somebody from Liverpool's cultural sector will make that point for them. But I also wanted to really back up the points that Alex Saint was making from Creative Tourism Consults. We've invested a load of money in a new School of Digital Arts, and I was on campus yesterday and seeing that the building's reached its height now. It's amazing. But that project can't work if it's just another elite art school. Not that we run any elite art schools, but you take my point. You know, it has to be something that's rooted in both the cultural ambitions and the creative sectors in the north of England. It has to make sure that it's accessible to children who can look at it from their local communities nearby in Hume and Moss Side and think, yeah, I want to go there. I want to go there and learn how to make amazing culture that reflects me, my life, my heritage. And we're absolutely rooted in doing that. And you know, our input into this inquiry, which is hugely welcomed, will be all about how we can contribute to that wider conversation about enhancing the skills base, but doing so in a really diverse and ambitious way.
Thank you, Michael. That's a brilliant point. Apologies again to the panel. I just need to go to Sarah Derbyshire. Sarah, are you there? Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely. So do you want to make your point?
Yes, thank you very much. The point I'm making is about rural and coastal communities where Orchestras Live does a lot of work. We focus on historically underinvested communities, and we work particularly on projects that involve co-creation from those communities with professional musicians and orchestras to shape their cultural environment and inspired by their own experiences. And we particularly have found during the pandemic that many of the issues that we'd been battling with before, experienced by people living in those rural and coastal areas, have certainly been exacerbated. Number one being digital. And we've been developing a lot of materials that can help us to ensure that people are still connected through analog materials such as art by post, but also those issues that panelists have highlighted to do with aspiration and that increased sense of isolation, which is really exacerbated at the current time. And cultural activity in those areas has an enormous part to play in rebuilding confidence and engagement and a shared experience.
Thank you, Sarah, for that really, really important point. We are running out of time, so I'm going to go back to the panel, just some final thoughts. So I'm going to pick on you one by one. Apologies for this in respect of anything that you feel it's important to say before we finish. I'm going to start at the end and then work backwards. Alex Saint. Alex, is there anything else you want to share with us before we come to an end?
Really just thank you for letting us speak. Really interesting to hear the comments, and completely agree that the sort of the issue around levelling up around digital is as much around community access to digital as it is to skills and capacity gaps within the sector.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Tom Wilcox.
Thanks, James. I think I would just say that investment is absolutely essential, but let's also think about what we can do as a sector to improve the way we work and make what we have work better.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Jabida?
Let's keep on creating dialogue and staying interconnected with each other. And yes, for me, it has to be about readdressing the balance. And yeah, hope that we can continue to find ways to find more authentic allyship and not performative from all cultural arts and counsellors from across the board, economics, everything related to culture, really, more authentic allyship.
Thanks, Jabida. Really, really, really important point. Dave Jenkins. Dave, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of say it's been great just to hear how all the Northern voices have come together on this, and it's it's just really exciting to be part of it, and looking forward to what might come out of the results of it. It's the North's not that it's able to pull together and work together. It's great to see that today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dave. Richard Mantle. Richard. Any thoughts, Richard? Okay. We'll
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry.
Richard.
Just to really say that I think just want to emphasize the way that the powerful results one can get from collaboration and participation between organizations, companies, artists, and higher education sector. I think we can all achieve more together than we can individually.
Thank you very much, Richard. Henry Morrison.
I think very briefly, I think it's been really great to hear, and I think the diversity of voices, and I think the understanding the strengths of the cultural sector as well, based on what are our strengths across the North, and that's really come out to me today, but also those particular specialisms. And I dwell on something like Production Park, which is the Centre for Live Music, right? Not just in the UK, but around the world, in part of Wakefield, right? And I think we need to really understand where our assets are to understand when it comes to opportunities, how best the North can exploit those. And that's an approach we certainly take to economic development. And I think there's no reason why that can't, to some extent, be mirrored when we discuss some of the ways in which the North could better collaborate, but also make the case for why it should be the lead in particular parts of the wider cultural future of the UK and globally, because it has some particular strengths that might otherwise not be so leverageable.
Thank you, Henry. A really important point. Hannah Mattison. Hannah.
I think one of the things we need to do, it's great to have so many different voices around the table today and to hear everyone's comments, but this is just scratching the surface. We're only a small number of people who work in these sectors and these industries. So even though we're covering a lot of ground between us, we all need to go away and encourage the communities, the artists, the other organisations who we work with to also be involved in this as we go forward, because the more voices, the stronger this inquiry will be.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Hannah. Keith Merrin. Keith.
Yeah, thanks. Just to go back to my first point, I think, which is about retaining that sense of ambition for what we can achieve in the North as a sector and for our communities. And the sooner we get back onto that tenaciously ambitious growth, which is what we're brilliant at in the North, I think, is, the better for me.
Completely agree with that, Keith. Great point. Pete Massey. Pete.
I mean, I think I would just reflect actually on the appetite that there is here and in the chat for this inquiry and how timely and important it feels like it is. And also collegiate this feels. It kind of feels, notwithstanding the fact that there are voices from Northern Culture not here, it does feel though that this is a particular moment in time, a really important moment in time, when we might stand half a chance of coming together and doing something fantastic.
Thank you, Pete. I don't think Sasha Lord is with us. Forgive me, Sasha, if you're on the call. But I hope my colleague Alison McGovern, MP, is still with us. Alison, are you with us?
She's gone, James.
Oh, Alison's gone. Well, can I say once again, thank you so much to the panel for inspiring, giving us politicians something to think about. And I think Jabina made a really, really crucial point that this is should be a collaborative process. We have to listen to the sector. We have to find solutions and funding to help you deliver what you do fantastically and create life chances, jobs, opportunities, creative experiences, cultural diversity. Absolutely inspiring. And thank you all so much for joining us. Now, in terms of, I have to remind you, I'm going to read from my piece of paper, so forgive me, everyone, please. Please, obviously, this is an ongoing inquiry. We want everybody to be involved with this. The Secretariat will put the relevant links in the chat, which I think I've seen already, the call to evidence portal, Twitter account, and the website. We need your support. I think this has been said many, many times. We want as many vocal supporters of Northern culture and Northern voices out there, so we can put forward the best case to government to give you the support, the help and the assistance, whether it's in education, whatever your age, whatever your background. We want to try and put forward proposals that are going to have a really positive impact on Northern culture. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to bring the session to an end, and we hope to see you all next time. Thank you.